Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning into this week's Stacker Chat. My name is Gina Abrams. I'm an early team member with the Stacks project, and I'm joined by Muneeb Ali, Stacks founder. Now, the Stacks 2.0 blockchain launched earlier this year, bringing apps and smart contracts to Bitcoin. How are you, Muneeb? What have you been up to today?
I'm good. I was actually right before this recording a podcast, which was a debate about smart contracts on Bitcoin with this guy Ruben, who is on the more extreme end of the spectrum, where he doesn't believe in any other asset other than Bitcoin. So it was definitely a interesting debate to have.
Excellent. Can you share a bit more background on the topic itself and maybe the Stacks position generally?
Yeah, so I think this came out of some Twitter conversations where there have been some Twitter discussions about this. The general theme of these discussions is that somebody would be talking about Stacks, and they would say, "Hey, Stacks brings smart contracts to Bitcoin," and then people so Ruben is kind of like 1% in that group of people who are let's just say that who fundamentally don't believe that any other asset other than Bitcoin should exist or have value, right? And then some of the comments that you would see would be, "Oh, but you could do this with Bitcoin without introducing any new asset." And then they would point to designs like space chains, that an idea that Ruben has been working on, and so on, and then try to point to some certain potential shortcomings of Stacks and so on. And then obviously we will explain that, hey, no, this is how Stacks works, and this is what the features are. And people thought that these Twitter discussions can get lengthy, so having like a podcast type of a framework could be more interesting. You could dig deeper into some of these ideas. So I think at a high level, one thing that people need to understand is there is almost like a day and night type of a difference between systems like Stacks or systems like space chains, because space chains actually don't exist. Not a lot of people know that, but they are paper designs. They're basically like high-level ideas that there has been some theoretical work on it, but they haven't been scrutinized, like, for example, in terms of safety or liveness properties, or even like building out a real system and then stress testing it, and then actually testing it in the wild with a mainnet, and then seeing what people do there, right? So it's a very different type of a comparison, trying to say, hey, we're trying to compare a paper design with a real system that is live and functional on the main chain, and anyone can attack it, and people are using it, and then people are locking up capital, and all the different corner cases of consensus are actually being tested out in the real world. So those are very different things. And I think in general, if folks who kind of like listen to that podcast, I would say that the arguments there are effectively on the lines of, I think early on, like this was at the starting of the podcast, I think there was some argument about, hey, Stacks chain has its own finality, which is a bad thing. And I was trying to say that's actually not how Stacks works. Stacks can have deep reorgs, and the way to do it is, like, for example, if you're changing the history, like the history of the actual Stacks transactions, you would also have to do a deep reorg of Bitcoin, right? There's another way that you can potentially attack the chain, and that's if you're trying to win a lot of blocks by spending a lot of money, right? So that's a different type of a thing. But I was talking about the case where you're trying to rewrite history, like Stacks transaction history, and you would then also have to go and try and rewrite Bitcoin history. And I think there was some sort of a confusion there that I tried clarifying a couple of times, and often it could become a little bit frustrating as well. But then I would say other big points there were, I think there was, towards the end of the podcast, there were some potential concerns around, hey, the Bitcoin miners can take over this network and take all the Bitcoins and not give it to stackers. That's not how the system works. Even if the Bitcoin miners somehow collude, like all of them collude with each other, and they're like, only the Bitcoin miners are going to mine on Stacks, we're not going to let anybody else mine, they would still have to follow the protocol. They would still have to send Bitcoin to the stacks holders in order to follow the protocol and earn the mining rewards, right? So I think there were a bunch of things like that, where I think the general theme is that there would be some invalid assumption that Ruben would have, and he would start poking holes using the invalid assumption, and I would basically correct it that, hey, this is not how the system works. And I think yeah, it's definitely interesting, and I think people can listen to the podcast and hear the two sides.
Okay, great. We'll be looking out for that then. Now, can you tell us a little bit more about the two-way peg problem and how proof of transfer interacts with Bitcoin in a pretty novel way?
Yeah, so I think this is actually one of the fundamental things that God discussed as well, that in general, when you're talking about any chain other than Bitcoin, and you're talking about, can you have some sort of a two-way peg where Bitcoin can move to that chain and then come back? That's kind of in a trustless way. That's a very interesting problem and a very hard problem to solve. And in many ways, it's the reverse side of that transfer. Like, how do you bring Bitcoin back? Or more specifically, it's basically, how can state on a different chain impact transactions on Bitcoin, right? Because the reverse of that is easier. Stacks is like that. Stacks actually reads all of the information on Bitcoin. If there's a transaction on Bitcoin that, let's say, a smart contract was watching out for, there can be a change that is triggered on Stacks based on a change on Bitcoin. So that's the one side of it. It's easy, it's live today, it works. The question becomes, how can you do the reverse of that? Can there be some state changes or logic on the stack side that can actually trigger a change in Bitcoin? And interestingly, proof of transfer, PoX, is a mechanism that actually solves that. Like, if you think about all the Bitcoin rewards that people are earning, the logic for that entirely lives on the stack side, right? So it's completely the logic on the stack side. And when people are giving out their Bitcoin addresses, where there is the PoX smart contract and people are locking up capital there, that is actually triggering the Bitcoin transactions that people are making to transfer Bitcoins on the Bitcoin chain, right? So that I think is a very interesting, novel, elegant solution to this potential problem, which could be generalized. Like, you could have a more general form of PoX-like mechanism, where there could be ways where logic on the Stacks chain is actually incentivizing people to trigger transactions on Bitcoin. And if they make the transactions the right way, they will get detected by Clarity smart contracts and can actually complete those transactions.
Awesome. Now, I'm curious if we could dive a little bit deeper into what you were just mentioning. What are some potential applications of that type of logic and some things that might be possible from it?
Yes, so I think I had a tweet storm about this, where I was talking about a Bitcoin lending application that people can build right now, where the Bitcoin stays on the Bitcoin main chain, and there's a Clarity contract that has some sort of a stable coin, let's say XUSD, that is a work that's in the pipeline. So you have the stable currency asset as collateral, and the smart contract can actually know when Bitcoin was sent out. So let's say I was lending it out, I send a Bitcoin transaction that triggers the start of the timer, and the time is in Bitcoin blocks. And the Clarity contract knows how many Bitcoin blocks have passed. Let's say it was like 300 blocks for the loan. And if my Bitcoin doesn't come back on the address that I specified, the Clarity contract would release the collateral to me, right? So that application is basically possible today. People can build it using Clarity contracts, and it works, and which is huge, right? I guess Bitcoin lending, where your Bitcoin stays on the Bitcoin chain. You don't have to go through any custodian, any wrapped asset, any tax consequences, nothing like that. Right? So that is amazing. But if you do the reverse of that, meaning that now you actually somehow want to have Stacks logic that is actually triggering the Bitcoin transactions, right? Over here, what was happening is it was Bitcoin transactions that were triggering the stacks logic. Now we are talking about the reverse of that there is stacks logic that is going to trigger Bitcoin transactions. So again, different types of applications are possible on the reverse side, but to do that, you need this functionality, right? So you need kind of like this ability where some sort of a stacks logic can actually come in and trigger a Bitcoin transaction. Let's think of something very simple. Let's say there is some sort of a lottery system that you want to build, right? So there's a lottery, people are participating in it, and the winner actually gets Bitcoin out. So to build something like that, what I mentioned, like if you implement the reverse side, which in a way PoX does, right? We just need to generalize it a little bit more. If you do that and make that programmable, then developers can actually write against that system, can actually build out a lottery-like system where the logic in that smart contract would actually trigger Bitcoin transactions.
Very interesting. Thank you. Now, what is your response to folks that feel that Bitcoin is a one-trick pony? And what other projects are you excited to see launch on Bitcoin?
Yeah, so I think this narrative has gained some legs, right? Like it's actually a pretty mainstream type of an argument now, because most people, like they don't kind of like operate in the deep side of crypto. Like they're not like, messing around with, hey, what's possible, what's not. For most people, like things are just too complicated and they just have a surface level understanding of things. And I do think this narrative has been gaining traction where Bitcoin is like a rock, right? And there are memes around, hey, Bitcoiners have their pet rock, but what can you do with a pet rock? Like you can just hold it. And then more innovation is happening on Ethereum. I think there's some truth to that for sure. If you look at just the number of developers who are building on top of Ethereum versus other ecosystems, clearly Ethereum is the place that has the largest amount of developers right now. There are other ecosystems that are also gaining developers, but Ethereum remains kind of like the place where more developers are. And these developers, if you're a new developer and you're just searching online for how to start programming, you would read material that would say Bitcoin is not programmable, you can't have smart contracts on Bitcoin, and that's why you would go and build on Ethereum or some other system. And I think that's a big misunderstanding that the Bitcoin community actually needs to get clear on internally, like even in the Bitcoin community itself, and then clarify that to other folks as well, because there are so many projects that are bringing smart contracts to Bitcoin, Stacks obviously being one of them. There's RSK. In some ways, like these federated chains like Liquid also bring these smart contract functionality, and then they're making different trade-offs, right? So there are different types of trade-offs that they're making, both on how the blockchain is built and then what type of programming interfaces are available. So on Liquid, it's a federated network, meaning that you're trusting the federation, and people can't just become miners on that chain. And which is fine if that is the type of trade-offs you want to make. And then they have a simplicity, a language in which people can try to write smart contracts. On the RSK side, it's merge mine, which means that a subset of Bitcoin miners can mine the RSK chain, and then they are compatible with EVM, right? So if you want to write Solidity code, you can potentially go and take a look at RSK around Bitcoin. And then in Stacks, it's actually permissionless mining. So anyone can come in and mine. All you need is basically run a Stacks node and have some Bitcoin to participate in mining. And Stacks actually has a new programming language called Clarity, which is a decidable language. So it's fairly expressive. You can pretty much write anything that you want to write, but you can have full, precise contracts where you know exactly how much gas fee is being consumed and exactly what the contract can and cannot do before it executes it, right? So in terms of the security of the language, it's very different from Solidity, it's very different from Turing complete languages, and you can have better guarantees for what programs can and cannot do. But I would say in general, all of these projects combined, and even there are some that I haven't mentioned, I don't think that people realize that all this innovation is happening around Bitcoin, and you can have decentralized finance on Bitcoin, or you can have NFTs on Bitcoin very directly. And Bitcoin actually has a rich history of interesting things being built on top, like all the way back to Counterparty that had some of the original NFTs, or even other merge mine systems like Namecoin that was merge mined with Bitcoin that introduced decentralized domains back in 2011. And over time, I think this narrative of Bitcoin is just a rock, and actually you can't have smart contracts around it, has somehow gained more traction. And I think that's actually leading to some misunderstanding out there in the industry.
All right. Well, thank you. That's a wrap for today. I hope you enjoyed your time with us. If you enjoyed this chat, please subscribe to the Stacks YouTube channel, where we'll be posting further sessions of these Stacker chats. If you want to learn more about Stacks, head over to stacks.co. And we're going to be tuning back in next week. If you'd like for us to cover specific topics or questions, definitely feel free to reach out. We'll have info down in the description below. And please feel free to get in touch. Thank you.
Thanks.